The British Atlantis, the mystery of the sunken Dunwich. Imagine a small, quiet village on the eastern coast of England, in Suffolk County. Today, just over 120 people live there. The place is called Dunwich, and at first glance, it seems like a forgotten spot where time has stood still. Simple houses, empty streets, the sound of the sea, nothing special. But if you dig into the past, you'll find something incredible. Beneath the water, at a depth of 3 to 10 meters, lie the ruins of a massive ancient city. Yes, the very same Dunwich that was once one of England's major ports, almost a second capital. For centuries, it's been resting underwater, like a lost Atlantis. So, what happened to it? Why did such a grand and important city vanish? Let's figure it out together, step by step, like regular folks, without fancy words, just curiosity and common sense. Dunwich in the past, a city that rivaled London, according to old records. In the 13th century, Dunwich was a real giant. It wasn't just a seaside village, but a bustling port handling goods from all over Europe. Historians say it was as big as London. Picture busy streets, tall stone walls, and a deep moat surrounding the city to keep enemies out. There were churches, monasteries, warehouses, homes of the wealthy and ordinary folks. They even called it the former capital of East Anglia. Trade was booming. Ships came and went, and the locals probably took pride in their city. But today, all that grandeur has shrunk to a tiny village. The official story claims Dunwich was destroyed by storms. Supposedly, in the 13th and 14th centuries, fierce tempests battered England's eastern coast. One storm, in the year 1347, swept about 400 houses into the sea. Then, in 1362, another storm finished off what was left. The survivors, so the story goes, decided it wasn't worth rebuilding, packed up, and left. By the end of the 14th century, Dunwich had supposedly vanished from the face of the earth, or so we're told. Storms or something bigger. It sounds reasonable at first. Storms can indeed cause havoc, flooding streets, wrecking homes, eroding shores. But let's think about it. If a storm had just washed the city away, you'd expect some traces to remain on land: debris, foundations, bits of walls. Instead, we see something else entirely. Dunwich wasn't swept into the sea like trash after a rain. It sank. Completely. Tens of meters underwater. The sea level rose so high that the city ended up submerged, as if someone turned on a giant faucet and flooded everything. Here's the kicker. When researchers started exploring the seabed off the coast in the early 21st century, they didn't just find a pile of ruins, they found whole buildings. Stone houses, churches, even the spire of one sticking out of the silt. This doesn't look like something waves smashed apart. Massive fortresses, monasteries with thick walls, these aren't easy to wash away. Sure, a wave might break a house, but the foundations would stay. Here, it's as if the city was gently lowered underwater and frozen in place. Peter Murphy, an English expert on coastal studies, was stunned. He said something like, "We thought Dunwich was completely wiped out by storms, that nothing was left. But we were shocked to find parts of the ruined city still intact underwater, recognizable even. This isn't the aftermath of a hurricane, it submerged streets, ports, warehouses." Between 2013 and 2015, they found the ruins of St. Peter's and St. Nicholas's churches, St. Catherine's Chapel, the Town Hall. Even the Knights Templar Church and All Saints Church were located, though they're still buried under 1 to 3 meters of sand. This clearly isn't the work of a storm. Underwater discoveries. What did they find? Picture this. Divers with oxygen tanks and flashlights plunge into murky water, and there's a ghost city. Hundreds of homes, palaces, a waterfront made of huge stone blocks. In the port, skeletons of ships that never got away. You can tell the city was alive, thriving, and then suddenly submerged. Most importantly, many structures aren't destroyed, they're flooded. It's like your house filling up to the roof with water, but still standing. The research continues today. Every year, they uncover something new, and maybe soon we'll see more photos or even lift artifacts from the depths. But one thing's already clear. This wasn't just a storm with a high tide. It feels like a massive disaster that raised the sea level by tens of meters in a flash. Why doesn't the official story add up? The official line is that Dunwich vanished in the 14th century due to storms. But dig a little deeper, and questions pop up. First, near the city, there's a submerged forest. During a strong low tide, tree stumps peek out of the water. They weren't swept away, they were flooded. That suggests it wasn't waves, but a sudden, lasting rise in water levels. Second, there's a timeline mess. For instance, in the heart of Dunwich stood a round Templar church, modeled after the one in Jerusalem. In the 14th century, it was handed over to the Hospitallers. But historians say that in the 16th century, King Henry VIII ordered it destroyed. Hold on. If the city was washed away in the 14th century, how could the king demolish something 2 centuries later? It's a contradiction no one properly explains. Third, items pulled from the seabed, coins, dishes, tools, are dated not just to the 14th century, but also the 15th and even early 16th centuries. So, the city was still alive and kicking long after those storms. Fourth, the Greyfriars Monastery, up on a hill farther from the shore, survived the 14th century storms. Parts of its walls, gates, and dining hall remain today. Yet, in 1538, it was destroyed again by Henry VIII's orders. How could that happen if the city was already gone? Finally, the maps. On every map of 16th century England, Dunwich is marked. Cartographers drew it as a key city. But on 17th century maps, nothing. It's gone. This wasn't some obscure hamlet no one bothered to check. It was a major port, nearly a second capital. And then, in the 16th century, it disappears. Why? My theory, a 16th century catastrophe. I believe Dunwich didn't vanish in the 14th century, but in the 16th. And not because of storms, it was a bigger calamity that shifted the sea level. Could it tie into what's called Doggerland, a vast area in the North Sea that once linked Britain to Europe? They say Doggerland sank thousands of years ago, but what if parts of it submerged later, in the Middle Ages? And that somehow hit Dunwich. Documents show that in the early 16th century, the city was still active. Nobles from London visited, kings donated to its churches, trade thrived. Then silence. I suspect that in 1538, a global disaster struck. Maybe an earthquake, a tsunami, or something we don't yet understand. And Dunwich was one of its casualties. Historical context. What was happening in England? Let's zoom out to England in those days. The 16th century was a time of upheaval. Henry VIII was breaking ties with the Catholic Church, shutting down monasteries, and seizing their lands in what's called the dissolution of the monasteries. Maybe the official story mixes up royal demolition with a natural disaster, or hides the truth to avoid scaring people. Economically, England was on the rise. Ports like Dunwich were vital for trading wool, grain, and fish. If the city survived into the 16th century, its loss would have been a massive blow. Imagine how much wealth and how many lives sank. It'd be like Liverpool drowning today. Economics and nature. How are they linked? Speaking of water, scientists say sea levels have shifted over time. After the Ice Age, they rose gradually. But the Middle Ages might have had surprises. If Doggerland submerged later than thought, it could have triggered a domino effect, coasts eroding, cities sinking. Dunwich isn't alone, the Netherlands has tales of drowned villages too. Economically, such disasters hit hard. Losing a port meant losing trade, jobs, taxes. If this wasn't a one-off, but part of a larger event, England might have lost more than we realize. Could that be why the story was rewritten to downplay how fragile their world was? Reflections. What does this mean for us? Dunwich makes you think. We assume the world around us is stable. But what if the sea decides to claim more land tomorrow? Today, technology lets us dive underwater, find old cities, study them. Back then, people just walked away, leaving their homes to the waves. To me, Dunwich isn't just a storm story. It's a mystery hinting we don't know everything about the past. Maybe official science isn't wrong on purpose, maybe it just doesn't want to face the truth. Or fears we'd panic, realizing how easily things can vanish. Conclusion. So, what happened to Dunwich? I think it wasn't a storm, but something bigger, a catastrophe that redrew England's map. The city thrived into the 16th century, then sank, taking homes, churches, and people's fates with it. While scholars argue and divers hunt for clues, we're left guessing. One thing's for sure, Dunwich reminds us that even great cities can become legends.